Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So, I want you to imagine your city has had absolutely no enforced laws for 19 years. Like, none.
Just a complete free-for-all.
Right, exactly. You can basically do whatever you want, whenever you want. I mean, the rules exist on paper, sure, but the police don't care, the judges don't care, and the mayor definitely doesn't care.
Yeah, it's total chaos.
Total chaos. But then, completely overnight, a new boss takes over, and he just flips a switch, and suddenly a minor mistake like something you didn't even realize was a crime yesterday gets you the absolute maximum penalty.
It's terrifying, really.
It is. And so today, for this deep dive, we are tearing apart William Shakespeare's Measure for Measure to figure out exactly what happens when, zero-tolerance justice collides with messy, flawed human reality.
Right. And what happens when the architect of that draconian enforcement, like the enforcer himself, falls prey to the exact same human desires he's suddenly punishing with death?
Exactly. I mean, it's a terrifying premise, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because it forces us to look at the fragility of the systems we build. Like, what happens when a society that has enjoyed incredibly lax rules suddenly pivots to absolute rigidity?
Yeah, you get whiplash.
You do. And this isn't just an ancient thought experiment. The core conflict we are exploring here revolves around a deeply recognizable human impulse, like the desire to clean up a mess by using extreme force.
And the inevitable hypocrisy that comes from that, right?
Exactly. The hypocrisy that arises when flawed humans try to act like perfect, unfeeling algorithms.
Yeah, it never works.
Mm-hmm.
So before we can even begin to judge any of the characters in this story, we absolutely have to understand the world they are inhabiting.
All right, context is everything.
It is. It's the city of Vienna, and the situation is just a complete disaster. The Duke of Vienna, this guy named Vincentio, has been ruling for 19 years. And he has been, well, let's say a highly permissive leader.
That's a very polite way to put it.
Right. He's basically let everything go. But he suddenly realizes that his leniency, his desire to not be the bad guy, has turned the entire city into a chaotic, vice-ridden swamp.
Yeah, and the laws exist, but they are utterly ignored.
Utterly ignored. There's this fantastic, vivid description in the text where the laws are compared to, and I love this imagery, to unscoured armor hung by the wall.
Oh, yeah, that is brilliant.
Right. Think about a knight's armor that hasn't been polished or oiled in 2 decades. It's rusted shut.
Yeah, it looks intimidating from a distance.
Exactly, but if you actually tried to use it, it would just crumble. They've just been sitting there gathering dust, and nobody in Vienna takes the law seriously anymore.
Well, that visual of the unscoured armor is crucial, I think, because it speaks to neglect. The laws are still technically on the books, but they have absolutely no teeth. Right. And the Duke realizes that he has let things slide for so long that if he were to suddenly wake up one morning and become a strict disciplinarian, it would be a disaster for his personal brand.
Oh, totally. He would seem tyrannical.
Exactly. The people would hate him. He's trapped by his own 19-year precedent of being like the cool dad.
Yeah, the cool dad who suddenly wants to enforce a curfew. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. So what is his solution? He fakes a diplomatic trip to Poland.
Which is just wild.
Right. He temporarily steps down from public view entirely, and he leaves his deputy, Lord Angelo, in charge.
Like Angelo.
And Angelo is famous throughout the city for his strictness, his absolute unbending moral purity. But here is the massive twist, right? The Duke doesn't actually leave Vienna.
He stays.
He stays. He puts on the robes of a friar, completely disguising himself, and secretly remains in the city to observe how Angelo handles the absolute power that has just been handed to him.
Okay, let me stop you right there because this is where it gets incredibly recognizable to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I look at the Duke's evasion of leadership here, and I can't help but draw a direct line to modern corporate culture.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right. It feels exactly like a nice guy CEO who has just let company culture become totally toxic. People are showing up late, no one is hitting their targets, there's no accountability, and it's all because the CEO desperately wants everyone to like him.
Right, he wants to be the buddy, not the boss.
Exactly. And instead of doing the incredibly hard, uncomfortable work of correcting the culture himself, instead of looking his employees in the eye and saying, hey, I messed up, things have to change, what does he do?
He brings in a consultant.
He brings in a ruthless outside consultant, a real hatchet man, someone whose only job is to execute mass layoffs, enforce strict new HR policies, and basically be the villain.
While the CEO is conveniently on a retreat.
Right. The CEO gets to keep his own hands clean. He keeps his reputation as the good guy who was, unfortunately out of town when the firings happened, while the deputy does all the dirty work.
That's a perfect analogy, actually.
So I really have to push back on the Duke being some kind of wise figure here. Does passing the buck like that ever actually cleanse a leader of their responsibility?
Oh, no. And that is the exact tension the text wants you to feel. You are supposed to be uncomfortable with the Duke's actions.
Okay, good. This is not just me.
No, definitely not. When he hands over power in the very first scene, his exact words to Angelo are, "Mortality and mercy in Vienna live in thy tongue and heart."
Wow.
Yeah, he is handing Angelo the literal power of life and death. Now, you have to ask yourself, is this a brilliant, calculated sociological experiment by a leader trying to clean up his city without triggering a revolt?
Or is it a cowardly abdication of duty?
Exactly. Or is it just deeply cowardly? If we connect this to the broader philosophy of leadership, delegating authority does not mean you have magically delegated ultimate responsibility.
Right. You're still the one in charge.
The Duke created the mess. His 19 years of inaction bred the vice. By bringing in a hatchet man, he is trying to fix the symptoms of the rot without taking any accountability for being the cause of the rot.
Yeah, he wants to have his cake and eat it too.
Perfectly said. He wants a perfectly ordered, clean city, but he wants the citizens to keep throwing parades for him.
Which brings us directly into the hands of this new leader, Angelo.
Yeah.
Because Angelo, he is not interested in being loved.
No, not at all.
He is interested in order. And this is where we see the violent collision between theoretical black and white justice and the messy, complicated, gray reality of actual human behavior.
The human element always ruins the theory.
It really does.
Yes.
And Angelo wastes absolutely no time. I mean, the ink isn't even dry on his new commission before he starts enforcing these long-dormant laws.
Right.
And the first real victim of this brand new regime is a young man named Claudio.
Yes. And we really need to look closely at Claudio's crime because it highlights the utter absurdity of zero tolerance.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Claudio's crime is that he has gotten his fiancée, Juliet, pregnant before they were officially legally married in a church. Now, in the context of the time, they were what was called handfasted. They were betrothed. They essentially considered themselves married in the eyes of heaven, and they fully intended to do the paperwork, so to speak.
But they lacked the outward, formal, legal order.
Exactly. They were just waiting for some financial details to clear with her family. But under the newly revived laws of Vienna, any fornication outside of a finalized legal marriage is a capital offense.
A death sentence.
It is a literal death sentence. So Angelo, completely ignoring the nuance of their commitment to each other, sentences Claudio to death, to literally have his head chopped off for sleeping with his future wife.
It is just staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like a clerical error escalating into an execution.
It really does.
And when people around Angelo push back on this, when they say, hey, maybe decapitation is a bit harsh for a couple in love, Angelo has this very specific, rehearsed justification.
Oh, he has a whole speech ready.
He has an entire philosophical framework for how the law should operate.
He does, and it is a philosophy based entirely on deterrence. Angelo basically argues, we must not make a scarecrow of the law, setting it up to fear the birds of prey and let it keep one shape till custom make it their perch and not their terror.
Okay, let's unpack that metaphor because it's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. What happens when a farmer puts a scarecrow in a field?
For the first few days, the crows are terrified of it.
Exactly. They stay away. But eventually, a brave crow lands on it. It realizes the scarecrow can't move. It can't bite. It's just straw.
Yeah, and soon, all the birds of prey are literally using the thing designed to scare them as a resting place.
That's it, exactly. Angelo is saying that if a law is just an empty threat that is never actually acted upon, which is exactly what the Duke did for 19 years, criminals eventually realize it's harmless.
They start perching on the scarecrow.
Yes. To Angelo, the law must be a terror. It must strike genuine fear into the populace, and the only way a law maintains its terror is if it is executed flawlessly, without a single exception.
Right. Without a single exception. The logic makes a chilling sort of sense, if you view humans purely as data points.
Yes, which he does.
But then you have a character named Escalus. He is the elder statesman, supposed to be Angelo's secondary in command.
Right.
And Escalus acts as this desperate voice of reason urging mercy. And the argument Escalus makes to Angelo is just so incredibly profound. It is the ultimate reality check for anyone in a position of authority.
Escalus provides what we might call the ultimate test of empathy.
Yeah.
He asks Angelo to look deeply inward before he strikes outward. He basically says to Angelo, let your honor consider this. If time, place, and temptation had all perfectly aligned for you.
This is good.
If the universe had presented you with the exact right circumstances, is it not entirely possible that you yourself might have committed this exact same crime?
Wow.
Escalus is asking Angelo to recognize his own potential for fallibility. He is begging him, do not judge this young boy as if you are some sort of pristine god incapable of error.
Judge him as a fellow human being.
Right. Judge him as someone who knows what it is to have human blood, human flaws, and human desires.
But Angelo completely brushes him off.
Completely. Angelo rejects the premise entirely. He says, "'Tis one thing to be tempted, Escalus, another thing to fall."
Unbelievable.
He believes that having a dark thought is irrelevant. All that matters is that he has the supreme willpower to never act on it, whereas Claudio lacked that willpower.
Okay, so translate this to the 21st century for a second, because we see this exact dynamic playing out constantly in modern zero-tolerance policies.
We really do.
Think about it. We see it in schools, where a kid gets automatically expelled because they had a butter knife in their lunchbox, and the rule says no weapons, no exceptions.
Yeah, context is thrown out the window.
Exactly. We see it in corporate HR departments, where a single poorly phrased joke from a decade ago can end a career instantly, with no room for context or growth.
Or the justice system.
Right. We see it most devastatingly in the justice system, with things like mandatory minimum sentencing, where judges are literally stripped of their ability to look at the circumstances of a crime.
That's a great point.
There is this constant agonizing tension between the very real need for societal order, which, let's be fair, Angelo is correctly arguing for because the Duke's leniency was ruining the city.
True.
But there's tension between that and the reality that human beings are messy, contextual, and make mistakes. We really have to ask ourselves, when does strict, uncompromising justice cross the line and just become sheer cruelty?
That is the pivotal question of this deep dive. And what is so fascinating here is that the text does not deny that society needs rules.
Right.
Chaos is not the answer. The Duke's 19 years of permissiveness were a genuine disaster. But Angelo's zero tolerance is equally disastrous. It's just destructive and in a different, colder way.
Yeah.
Zero tolerance policies treat human beings as algorithms rather than creatures of flesh, blood, and circumstance.
That's such a good way to phrase it.
Absolute justice, when it is applied without a shred of context or mercy, inevitably becomes its own form of tyranny. It forgets the human element entirely. And a system that forgets the human element is destined to fracture.
And fracture it does, because Escalus is warning to Angelo that Angelo himself might fall if he were faced with the exact right temptation, proves to be terrifyingly prophetic.
It really does.
The universe has a very dark sense of humor,
Yeah.
because the temptation Angelo isn't prepared for isn't vice, it isn't a bribe, and it isn't a prostitute. It's weaponized virtue.
Yes.
And this sets up what I think is one of the most intense, psychologically complex confrontations in all of Western literature.
We are talking about the meeting between Angelo and Isabella.
Right.
And to understand why this meeting is so explosive, you have to understand who Isabella is.
Yeah, give us her background.
She is Claudio's sister, but more importantly, she is a novitiate. She is a young woman who is just days away from entering a convent and taking her lifelong vows as a nun.
So she's extremely devout.
Incredibly pure, deeply intellectual, fiercely articulate, and strictly moral herself. She actually wishes the rules of the convent she is joining were stricter.
Wow.
So when she hears her brother is going to be executed for fornication, she is horrified by his sin, but she comes to Angelo anyway to plead for his life.
And her argument isn't just crying and begging. Like, she is a philosopher. She philosophically dismantles Angelo's entire worldview.
She really takes him apart.
She points out the inherent arrogance of human power. She tells him that the greatest beings, the divine beings, are the ones who show mercy, not the ones who constantly hurl thunderbolts.
Yes, exactly.
There are two specific quotes from her that we need to spend some serious time unpacking here. The first one she throws at him is this: "Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant."
That line is a masterpiece of rhetorical framing.
It's so good.
She is acknowledging his authority. She is saying, I see you. You have the giant's strength. You have the legal right to crush my brother. But she is drawing a massive distinction between possessing power and how one wields it.
Right. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. Just because you have the legal right to destroy someone doesn't mean it is morally right to do so. Using power simply because you have it, simply because you are big and the person beneath you is small, is the definition of tyranny, not justice.
It's like telling a tank commander that just because he can drive over a sedan doesn't mean he's a good driver.
Perfect analogy, yeah.
But then she follows it up with this devastating, almost cosmic observation about human nature. She looks at Angelo sitting there so smug and self-righteous, and she says, "Man, proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, plays such fantastic tricks before high heaven as makes the angels weep."
Dressed in a little brief authority.
Yeah.
That phrase should haunt anyone who has ever held a leadership position. It highlights the temporary, fragile, almost theatrical nature of human power.
Like we're just playing dress up.
We really are. We put on a judge's robe, a police badge, a CEO's suit, or a manager's name tag, and we wear this authority like a costume. And that costume puffs us up with intense pride.
It makes us forget who we really are.
Exactly. It makes us forget what she called our glassy essence, our utter fragility, our mortality, the fact that we are all just a few decades away from being dust.
It's a brutal reality check.
Isabella is trying to splash cold water on Angelo's face. She is trying to wake him up from the delusion of his own righteousness. She wants him to see that in the grand scheme of the universe, his political power is microscopic and fleeting.
Right, and by acting like he is a god dispensing absolute judgment, he is actually just acting like an angry ape putting on a ridiculous show that literally brings the angels to tears.
Yeah, she's basically calling him a clown.
And you would think a speech like that would absolutely break him. It would move him to mercy or, at least a deep shame.
You would hope so.
But here is the shocking twist. It doesn't. Instead, Isabella's purity, her massive intellect, her fierce, unyielding advocacy for her brother, it ignites something incredibly dark in Angelo.
It's a very disturbing reaction.
Extremely. He is suddenly overcome with this twisted, completely illicit desire for her. And to his credit, or maybe to his absolute horror, he's intelligent enough to realize his own hypocrisy in real time.
Yes, the self-awareness hits him immediately.
He has this frantic internal monologue where he is essentially panicking, asking himself, the tempter, or the tempted, who sins most? He is literally blaming her for tempting him by being so virtuous.
And to really understand what is happening in Angelo's brain here, we need to look at the mechanics of repression.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Think about what we call the Jungian shadow. Imagine your psyche is a swimming pool, and your dark, socially unacceptable desires are a beach ball.
Okay, I can picture that.
For his entire life, Angelo has been violently shoving that beach ball down to the very bottom of the pool. He has built his entire identity around being the guy who doesn't even know what a beach ball is.
Right, his blood is very snow broth, I think someone says.
Yes, exactly. He thinks he has conquered his humanity. But you cannot simply erase human nature. The harder you push that ball down, the more pressure builds up.
Yeah.
By repressing his desires so violently, rather than acknowledging and managing them, he's allowed them to mutate in the dark.
So when it finally bursts to the surface, it doesn't just pop up gently, it explodes like a geyser.
Exactly. When he is finally tempted, he has absolutely no internal coping mechanisms to handle it. And notice what tempts him.
Right.
He realizes the terrifying truth. Modesty may more betray our sense than woman's lightness. He isn't tempted by a prostitute. He isn't tempted by someone trying to seduce him.
He's tempted by a saint.
Yes. Her absolute rejection of the physical world is precisely what makes his repressed physical desire go haywire. The beach ball explodes out of the water and it shatters his entire self-image.
He is physically disgusted by the very thing he desires, which creates this massive, agonizing cognitive dissonance. It's fascinating because if you look at our modern world, this mechanism maps so perfectly to public figures.
Oh, absolutely it does.
You see it constantly with politicians, extreme moral leaders, or even certain social media influencers. People who build their entire public brand on preaching strict, uncompromising purity.
The loudest voices in the room.
Right, they're the ones condemning everyone else's behavior, and then inevitably, they're the ones caught in the most massive, hypocritical, deeply embarrassing scandals.
Without fail.
The psychological danger of violently repressing our own flaws just to project an image of perfect, unassailable authority is quite literally a ticking time bomb.
That is the exact mechanism. When you refuse to integrate your shadow, when you refuse to say, hey, I am a human being capable of greed, lust, and anger, and I must manage those traits, that shadow ends up controlling you from the subconscious. Angelo couldn't admit he had human flaws, So when those flaws finally surfaced, they didn't just humble him. Because they had been starving in the dark for so long, they consumed him.
They corrupted him completely.
Completely and instantly.
And that catastrophic internal crisis of Angelo's instantly becomes Isabella's external nightmare. Because Angelo doesn't just, sit with his uncomfortable feelings. He acts on them.
He does.
And this brings us to a moral dilemma in the text that is going to deeply challenge and probably infuriate modern listeners. It is a massive obstacle for us today. Angelo calls Isabella back for a second meeting, and he drops the mask.
The mask is fully off.
He gives her a horrific ultimatum. She must sleep with him, or Claudio will be executed tomorrow.
It is the ultimate vile abuse of power. It is textbook extortion.
It's disgusting.
He is weaponizing his governmental authority and his control over her brother's life to demand access to her body.
And Isabella's reaction is not to bargain. It is instantaneous and absolute. She refuses.
Right.
She famously says, "I'd rather give my body than my soul." For her, surrendering her chastity, especially under these coerced, sinful circumstances, would be a mortal sin that would permanently damn her to hell for eternity.
Yes. So she runs straight to the prison to tell Claudio what happened.
And she assumes, because she operates on this incredibly high plane of moral idealism, she assumes that Claudio will hear this and bravely accept death rather than let his sister be violated and eternally damned.
Which is a huge assumption to make about another person.
Huge. And at first he actually does kind of play along. He acts noble. He says, "Thou shalt not do't."
He tries to be the brave older brother.
He does. But then as the seconds tick by, there's this deeply human, deeply pathetic psychological turn. The actual visceral reality of his own impending death sets in. Claudio totally collapses.
It is one of the most raw, honest depictions of existential dread ever put on paper.
It really is.
Claudio stares into the abyss, and all of his noble chivalric conditioning just evaporates. He gives this chilling speech. "Aye, but to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot."
Oh, man.
He isn't just afraid of nothingness. He imagines his physical body becoming a kneaded clod of dirt. He imagines his spirit bathing in fiery floods or being trapped in thick-ribbed ice, blown with restless violence round about the pendant world.
It's terrifying imagery.
It is. The sheer overwhelming terror of the unknown, of losing his physical existence and facing eternal torture, completely shatters his moral compass. He goes from being a brave brother to a terrified animal in a cage.
And so he breaks.
He breaks. He looks at his sister, who is about to be a nun, and he begs her to commit the sin to save his life.
He actually begs her.
He rationalizes it. He says, "What sin you do to save a brother's life, nature dispenses with the deed so far that it becomes a virtue." He's basically telling her, God will forgive you because you did it for me.
And stop right here, because this right here is the major obstacle for anyone listening to this today. Sitting here in the 21st century, we watch this interaction, and we are intensely, squirmingly uncomfortable.
Oh, very much so.
Because our modern instincts pull us in two completely different directions. On one hand, from a modern, largely secular viewpoint, we look at Isabella, and we might think she is being rigidly dogmatic, maybe even cruelly unsympathetic.
Right. Many readers hate her for this.
Exactly. The idea of prioritizing a theological concept of a soul, or the concept of chastity, over a literal, breathing, terrified human life standing right in front of you feels almost sociopathic to a modern mind. Like, why wouldn't she take the hit to save her brother?
That's the common modern reaction.
But at the exact same time, we look at Claudio, and we are utterly disgusted by his cowardice. We judge him harshly for being willing to sacrifice his sister's bodily autonomy, to subject her to sexual trauma and extortion, just to save his own skin.
It's an impossible, horrifying grind.
It really is. How do we reconcile this?
Well, to navigate this obstacle, we have to do the hard work of stepping out of our modern framework and understanding the psychological and theological reality of the time.
Okay.
We cannot judge Isabella as if she is a 21st century secular humanist. For Isabella, spiritual death is not a metaphor. It is not a poetic concept.
It's real to her.
Hell is an absolute, literal, burning reality. It is far, far worse than physical death. To damn her soul for eternity, to suffer forever, just to buy her brother maybe 30 or 40 more years of physical life on earth is, in her framework, a terrible, illogical trade.
Right, the math just doesn't work for her.
Exactly. It's not that she doesn't love him, it's that she believes the soul is the only thing that truly matters. But more broadly, what we are really being forced to look at here are the ugly, desperate, degrading things human beings do when they are pushed into a corner by corrupt authority.
That's a great point. That's the real villainy here. It's not Isabella's rigidity or Claudio's cowardice, it's Angelo's extortion.
Precisely. Angelo's tyranny doesn't just threaten Claudio's physical life. It degrades the humanity of both Claudio and Isabella.
Yeah.
It forces them into a terrifying, unsolvable ethical trolley problem where there are no clean choices, only trauma. Corrupt authority pits the victims against each other, making them fight over their own survival and morality while the tyrant just watches.
Okay, so the tension is at a breaking point.
Right.
The situation seems hopelessly trapped. Angelo is utterly corrupt and holding all the cards. Isabella is rigidly virtuous, protecting her soul, and won't budge an inch.
And Claudio's terrified.
Right, Claudio's terrified, weeping, and begging for his sister to sacrifice himself. It was a total deadlock. And this is when the Duke steps in.
Ah, yes, the Duke.
Remember, he has been creeping around disguised as a friar this whole time, listening in on all this misery. And he comes up with a fix. But I have to say, it is a highly, highly questionable fix. It's a plot device known as the bed trick.
Yes, the infamous bed trick. The Duke pulls Isabella aside and devises a very convoluted, legally tricky plot.
Convoluted is putting it mildly.
Well, he happens to know a piece of gossip. He knows that Angelo was previously betrothed, hand-fasted, just like Claudio and Juliet, to a woman named Mariana.
Right.
But years ago, Mariana's brother died at sea, and her marriage dowry was lost with him. When the money vanished, Angelo immediately abandoned her, slandered her reputation to get out of the contract, and left her heartbroken and disgraced, living in isolation.
What a guy.
Right. So the Duke's plan is this. Isabella will go back to Angelo and pretend to agree to his horrific demand. She will demand that the encounter happen in the dead of night in complete pitch black so no one can see.
Oh.
But when the time comes, Mariana will secretly take Isabella's place in the dark.
Wow.
Mariana will consummate the union with Angelo. And because they were previously betrothed under the bizarre technical laws of the time, this physical consummation would basically force Angelo to legally honor his old contract with her.
This is so messed up.
In the Duke's mind, it's a perfect solution. Claudio's life is saved, Isabella's soul remains untainted, and Mariana gets the husband she still inexplicably wants.
Okay, well, wait, hold on. I have to push back here violently. The Duke is the good guy here. He's the wise friar fixing the city.
That's how it's presented.
Because this bed trick sounds completely unhinged to me.
Yeah.
He is tricking a man into sleeping with someone he absolutely did not consent to sleep with.
Right, non-consensual deception.
He is using Mariana's physical body essentially as a legal loophole, as a bargaining chip to settle a contract. He's weaponizing intimacy. How on earth are we supposed to root for this guy? Am I missing something? Or is this just toxic leadership fighting toxic manipulation? It feels gross.
Your discomfort is entirely justified, and it's a debate that literary scholars have had for centuries.
I can imagine.
When we apply discernment to ancient texts, we have to separate dramatic conventions from enduring ethical wisdom. In the context of early modern storytelling, the bed trick was a relatively common folklore trope.
Really? Audiences just accepted it.
Yeah, the audience in 1604 would have likely cheered. They would have accepted it as a clever, satisfying ruse to trick a villain. However, looking at it through any kind of modern ethical lens, it is deeply murky, non-consensual, and manipulative.
Extremely.
But if we try to extract the deeper philosophical meaning, the Duke here embodies a concept we might call craft against vice.
Craft against vice. Okay, so fighting a dirty system with dirty tactics. Fighting fire with fire.
Precisely. The text isn't necessarily holding up the Duke's methods as a universal standard of moral goodness. Rather, it is acknowledging a very gritty, pragmatic, and uncomfortable reality.
Which is?
In a profoundly broken, corrupt system, purely idealistic virtue almost never wins. Look at Isabella. Her pure, shining virtue, her speaking truth to power, it didn't work.
It really didn't.
It didn't melt the tyrant's heart. It actually made Angelo infinitely worse. It gave him ammunition. Sometimes, the text seems to suggest, when the system is that deeply poisoned, a pragmatic, morally gray, even deceptive approach is required to defeat entrenched corruption. You cannot fight a pig in a white suit. You have to get down in the mud to wrestle it.
Okay, I see the realpolitik angle there. But here's the massive kicker. Even the pragmatic fix, this incredibly shady Machiavellian manipulation, completely fails.
It blows up in his face.
It really does. Because true corruption rarely honors its deals. After the night with who he firmly believes is Isabella, Angelo wakes up and he reneges on his promise. He breaks the deal.
He sure does.
He is terrified that if he lets Claudio live, Claudio will eventually find out what happened, realize Angelo violated his sister, and take violent revenge. So Angelo sends a secret order to the prison, execute Claudio immediately, ahead of schedule, and send me his severed head as proof.
Which is a devastating psychological turn.
It is.
It proves that Angelo has passed the moral event horizon. He hasn't just slipped up. He has fully embraced the darkness. He has tasted absolute power. He's committed extortion and what he believes is a massive transgression. And now his only guiding principle is self-preservation at any cost.
So he's willing to just kill him.
He is willing to murder a man he promised to save just to cover his tracks. This betrayal forces the Duke, who thought he was so smart with his little bed trick, into a complete panic. The Duke has to frantically manipulate the prison provost to delay the execution.
Which leads to more manipulation.
Yes, exactly. Luckily for the Duke, or conveniently for the plot, I should say, another prisoner, a notorious pirate named Ragozine, has just died of a fever in the dungeon that very morning.
Convenient.
Very. And Ragozine happens to look a bit like Claudio. So the Duke convinces the provost to swap the bodies, they cut off the dead pirate's head, and they send Ragozine's head to Angelo in a bag as proof that Claudio is dead.
This is so dark.
But here's the most baffling part. The Duke keeps Claudio's survival a secret even from Isabella.
I hate this part.
When Isabella comes to the prison asking if her brother is safe, the Duke looks her in the eye and tells her that Angelo broke the deal and Claudio is dead. He lets her weep. He lets her experience the full traumatizing grief of losing her brother.
Which is just another massive layer of emotional manipulation by the Duke.
It is cruel.
He justifies it by saying he wants to make her eventual joy even sweeter, which is incredibly narcissistic. But all of this deception, all of these moving parts, set up the massive climax of the story in Act V. The public reckoning.
Yes, the big finale.
The Duke returns to Vienna as himself, the Grand Ruler, shedding his friar disguise in secret. He meets Angelo and Escalus at the city gates in front of a massive crowd. And Isabella and Mariana step forward in front of everyone and publicly accuse Angelo of extortion, corruption, and murder.
It's a brilliant, highly theatrical trap. And Angelo, of course, does what corrupt authority figures always do. He gaslights them.
Naturally.
He denies everything. He doesn't panic. He relies entirely on his pristine reputation. He tells the Duke, my authority bears so credent bulk meaning, my public image is so solid, I am so respected, who's going to believe these hysterical women over me? He literally tries to have Isabella and Mariana arrested for slander and treason. He tries to use the justice system to silence his victims.
But then, the ultimate reveal. The Duke leaves the stage for a moment, comes back in his friar disguise, intentionally gets into an argument with the guards, and in the scuffle, his friar's hood is pulled back.
The trap is sprung.
Suddenly, Angelo is staring into the face of the Duke. He realizes in a fraction of a second that the friar, who has been sneaking around the city, taking confessions, orchestrating the bed trick, the man who knows absolutely everything about his hypocrisy, is the ultimate authority in the land.
It's all over.
Angelo is instantly crushed. The game is over. He doesn't even try to make excuses. He just drops to his knees and begs for immediate death.
And this brings us to the ultimate philosophical question of the text, the core wisdom we have been driving toward for this entire hour. What is true justice?
Right.
Because the villain is finally caught, the hypocrisy is exposed. Now it's time for sentencing. How does the society heal from this?
So the Duke hands down the final judgments. First, he forces Angelo to marry Mariana right there on the spot. This is crucial because it instantly secures her ruined reputation and her financial future. He forces Angelo to make right what he broke years ago.
Yes, restorative justice.
Exactly. Then, the Duke turns to Angelo and says, essentially, because you murdered Claudio, you must die. The exact punishment you dealt out will be dealt to you. Measure for measure, an eye for an eye.
Right.
But before the executioner can take Angelo away, something absolutely incredible happens. Mariana, the woman Angelo, abandoned and slandered, falls to her knees and begs the Duke to spare her new husband's life.
It's wild.
And she turns to Isabella, the woman Angelo extorted and supposedly forced into grief, and asks Isabella to kneel with her.
This is, without a doubt, the most breathtaking, challenging moment in the entire story. Keep in mind the psychological state of Isabella right now. She still firmly believes that Angelo murdered her brother just a few hours ago.
Right. She thinks he's dead.
She has every single right, legally, morally, and emotionally, to demand his blood. It would be perfect legal retributive justice. No one in the crowd would blame her.
Not a single person.
But Isabella, the victim of his extortion, the woman whose rigid black and white worldview started this whole chain of events, slowly kneels down in the dirt next to Mariana. She finds the unfathomable capacity to forgive her abuser.
Gives me chills.
She looks at the Duke and asks him to spare Angelo's life.
It's astounding. It defies human nature. After everything she has been through, she chooses grace over retribution. And the moment she does this, the moment she breaks the cycle of vengeance, the Duke reveals that Claudio is actually alive.
The big reveal.
He brings Claudio out. Everyone is pardoned. Angelo is spared. Claudio is spared. It's a complete radical subversion of what we naturally expect to happen to the bad guy at the end of a story. Like, we want to see Angelo hang, but the text refuses to give us that satisfaction.
It absolutely refuses. And if we look for the comparative insight here, we have to look directly at the title of the play itself. Measure for Measure is a direct, undeniable reference to the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, the specific verse is, "Judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again."
Measure for measure.
Exactly. The entire story is a profound, grueling exploration of restorative justice versus retributive justice. The text suggests that if absolute strict justice is applied without context, if we demand an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life in every single situation, eventually the whole world goes blind.
Eventually we all hang.
Because, as Escalus pointed out earlier, we are all flawed. We are all capable of falling. The only way society actually survives, the only way we don't tear each other apart with our own rigid rules, is through mutual, radical grace. Isabella kneeling, finding that grace is the only thing that heals the community. Justice alone just creates more corpses.
Man, so how do we take the messy, intense politics and theology of 17th century Vienna and apply them to our own lives on a Tuesday morning? What is the practical how-to for you, the listener, trying to navigate your own world? Let's talk about a practice I want to call the Escalus check.
I love that, the Escalus check. It is a highly practical, grounding tool for daily life.
How does it work?
When you are about to harshly judge someone, maybe it's a colleague who made a significant mistake on a project, a family member who snapped at you unfairly, or even a public figure who's currently being dragged and canceled on the internet, I want you to pause.
Just take a breath.
Do the Escalus check. Ask yourself this very specific question. If my internal desires, the specific stresses of my life, my background, my trauma, and the exact timing had perfectly matched theirs, would I have fallen in the exact same way?
It absolutely forces empathy. You cannot remain arrogant when you realize your own capability for failure. And beyond that, I want to challenge you to reflect on the scarecrows of the law that you set up in your own life. Like, what are the rigid rules or moral standards that you loudly impose on others, but quietly, secretly, find loopholes for yourself?
Whoa, that's a tough question to answer, honestly.
Right. Where are you demanding strict, zero-tolerance justice from your partner or your coworkers, while secretly expecting them to offer you infinite mercy and understanding when you inevitably mess up?
That is the ultimate crux of it. The question to sit with is this: where in your life are you dressed in a little brief authority? And how is that authority blinding you to your own shared humanity?
Yeah.
Whether you are a mid-level manager, a parent dealing with a teenager, or just someone leading a group project, authority has a hypnotic effect. It can make us forget our glassy essence. It can make us arrogant and cruel.
It really can.
Actively remembering our shared messy fallibility is the only way to wield power justly.
But I don't want to tie this up with a neat little bow, because the text doesn't let us off the hook that easily, and neither should we. The Duke achieves this beautiful restorative justice at the end. The community is whole. But look at what it cost to get there.
The cost was massive.
He used incredible deception. He manipulated vulnerable people's lives like pieces on a chessboard. He literally caused Isabella's severe, paralyzing emotional trauma by letting her believe her brother was dead, just to test her capacity for forgiveness.
And that leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to mull over as we end today. Is a harmonious, forgiving society worth the cost of transparency and honesty to get there?
It's a heavy question.
Can true justice, the kind that actually heals a broken community, ever be achieved without getting your hands a little dirty? The text gives us the beautiful ideal of grace, but it absolutely refuses to pretend that the road to get there is clean or easy.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.